thank you very much. My name is Tom Gais. I'm director of the Rockefeller Institute of Government, and delighted to have our special speaker here today at the forum. A little more than a year ago, on November 30th, 2009, Dick Ravitch spoke at a conference at the Rockefeller Institute held down in New York City on state fiscal problems. A lot of the conference focused on the short-run state fiscal problems, which are pretty overwhelming and remain so. But the Lieutenant Governor took a different tack and focused more on the large and growing structural deficits in states and their consequences. He also announced at that time that he decided to work with the Rockefeller Institute and several consultants to address the problem in New York State. Well, a lot has happened since then. Unfortunately, the structural deficit is still with us. Nor were his recommendations adopted, but a lot was accomplished. The Lieutenant Governor put together a coherent, thoughtful, and practical package of fiscal reforms that should now, I think, be the starting point for any serious effort to grapple with New York State's long-term fiscal situation. He also educated many of us, many citizens of New York, people from around the country, many people who didn't want to hear what he had to say, but who often tried to change the subject. But despite their efforts, I think you'll find more awareness now of several important and politically inconvenient points. First, that the way we typically balance the budget in New York State does not begin to address the structural deficits, and that a multi-year approach is essential. Second, that the persistence of the structural deficit can distort the state's priorities, notably away from investments and factors critical to the state's economic future. And third, that this problem is tough but not hopeless. There are ways of restructuring our institutions and finances that could plausibly and eventually lead us to structural balance. And fourth, that the problem of the structural deficit is neither a conservative nor a liberal issue, but a basic, fundamental governance issue. That is to say, with polarization and immobilism in Washington now, states and their citizens need to reestablish a margin for governance, a capacity to respond to the realities we face in the present and the foreseeable future, and to stop being weighed down by the need to wrestle year after year with the yawning gulf between our past commitments and our current resources. To the extent that there is more understanding of these and many other points about our state's fiscal situation and practical ideas about how to remedy the problems, I think we have the Lieutenant Governor to thank. Well, it's no surprise that Richard Ravitch took on this task precisely when it's probably the hardest to solve. He's been doing fairly impossible tasks much of his life. After his early years of work as a lawyer and in real estate and stints in Washington and public life, in 1975, Governor Hugh Carey appointed him chair of the New York State Urban Development Corporation, and he led the successful effort to rescue the corporation from insolvency, and he rebuilt New York City's credit during some of the city's darkest years. Returning to his family's construction business afterwards, he created over 45,000 units of affordable housing in New York City, Washington, and Puerto Rico. And then he came back to public life when he essentially revived the Mass Transit Authority in the late 1970s and early 1980s and secured new subway cars, buses, and renovated signals and stations. In the mid-1980s, he became chairman and principal owner of the Bowery Savings Bank and returned it to profitability after years of financial weakness. And he continued to be successful in business and study commissions in the decades thereafter. And finally, in 2009, he became Lieutenant Governor of New York, and probably in certainly the most interesting way ever in the history of this state. Well, part of his success, aside from his intelligence, may be his ability to work well with so many different people, union and business leaders, legislators and executives, maybe not always ball players, and draw the very best from them. And fortunately for us here at the Rockefeller Institute, we had first-hand experience with this leadership and with a remarkable group of other people working with them. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work not only with Richard Ravitch this last year, but also with Michael Evans as Chief of Staff, Carol Claricane, former Budget Director of New York City and scholar at the Brookings Institution, Deborah Bachrach, former Medicaid Director of New York State, Nora Fitzgerald of the New York Federal Reserve, and I should add the incomparable Suzanne Garment, political scientist, writer, tax lawyer, and generally a person capable of doing whatever needs to be done. Don Boyd and Bob Ward worked closely with the team and did some of the best work of their already accomplished careers. And I'd also like to thank funders for the project, New York Community Trust, the Revson Foundation, IBM International, the Boldman Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Today, Bob Ward will lead a conversation with the Lieutenant Governor, or he will participate in that conversation. Bob is our Deputy Director of the Institute. He's author of New York State Government, second edition, and our expert on New York State government. He's also a nationally recognized expert on state and local government finances, and he's asked routinely to give talks on state and fiscal issues all over the country, including testimony before the U.S. Congress. Now, I'd like to welcome Bob Ward and the Lieutenant Governor of New York, Richard Ravitch.